Betty. I had to act real nice before she. Good morning, everybody. We got a good crowd today. Wow. You all got up. Evidently, you didn't know I was teaching. You showed up. Great. We're in lesson 5, the final days of Jesus. Lesson 5. It's the Gospel of John, the 19th chapter, 17 through 27. Standing by the cross. Lesson 5, the final days of Jesus. The main idea of this lesson today, folks, is Jesus cares for you and me during the most painful experiences in our lives. There's not a person in this room, I'm sure, that hasn't had some painful experiences in their life. It may have been a sickness, a death, a birth that didn't work out good for children, the loss of children and so forth. And, you know, we've all had these painful experiences in our lives. Now, this lesson today should help all of us feel a lot better than we felt about it. We're going to be in John 19, 17 through 27, and I'm going to read it first, and then we'll work around it. And Jesus, bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha. When they had crucified him and 2 others with him on either side, one, and Jesus in the center. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near to the city, and it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. Verse 21. Then said the chief priest of the Jews to Pilate, write not the King of the Jews, but he said, I am the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part, and also his coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. Verse 24. They said, therefore, among themselves, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it. For it shall be that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, they parted my raiment among them, and for my vesture they did cast lots. These things, therefore, the soldiers did. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother, and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple standing by whom he loved, he said to his mother, woman, behold thy son. Then he said to the disciple, behold thy mother. And from that hour, that disciple took Mary into his own home. Powerful, powerful. Let's step back a little bit, folks, from Jesus dying on the cross and see what kind of procedure took place with criminals going through that procedure. One, there was no more terrible death than death by crucifixion. Even the Romans regarded it with a shudder of horror. It was never done in Rome, but only in the provinces, and there only in the case of slaves or criminals. Never done in Rome, but in Israel it was done only in the case of slaves or criminals. Why wasn't it done in, I want to ask you a question, why wasn't it done in Rome but only in the provinces? Anybody got a good answer? Simply, it was Roman law. it was a crime for a Roman citizen to be bound and a worse crime for him to be beaten. Actually, criminals in Rome were tried in civilized ways. So the way criminals were treated in Rome was so far different from what they allowed. William Barclay gave in details the routine of crucifixion. It was always the same. When the case had been heard, Bill, and the criminal condemned, the judge uttered the fateful sentence, "Idis ad crucem," you will go to the cross. It happened immediately by a company of 4 Roman soldiers. So the judge who's hearing the case, he said, and he comes to the conclusion that this guy is guilty. He said, take him to the cross. Now it happened immediately. This happened early in the morning. They wanted to have it early in the morning, and it happened immediately. And as soon as the judge said that, 4 Roman soldiers came in and they took him to the cross. The condemned man had a cross placed upon his shoulders, then scourging took place. Class, what was scourging? What was it? Yeah.
Beat him with a whip.
Beat him with a whip. And some of those whips were pretty rough. A lot of leather. They had a lot of leather, which hurt, cut. So the guy was already in bad shape by the time he got to the cross. But he had to carry that cross on his shoulders. The scourging was awful. The criminal was lashed and goaded all the way to the place of crucifixion. All the way he's going to the place of crucifixion, and he is being scourged and lashed all the way. Before him, an officer walked with a placard on which was written the crime he committed and for which he was to die. The condemned man was placed in a center of a quaternion, which is a word meaning 4 Roman soldiers. So, class, look at this. The condemned man, Jesus, is walking to the cross. He's carrying the cross that he's going to be crucified on. 4 Roman soldiers, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and they are taking him to the cross. It was done in daylight and journey through a lot of streets. Now, let's use a little common sense. Why did Rome say, okay, when a person is crucified, we want to do it in Rome, in daylight, early in the morning, like 9 o'clock, which it was, and have that person go through the streets? Why?
Example.
Huh?
Example to the people.
Exactly. He's there for the people. Why do they want the people to see that?
Like a deterrent.
As a deterrent. You are right. You are right. Hey, he's going broad daylight, 9 o'clock in the morning, carrying the cross, going through the street. The guy with the placard in front is saying what that person is guilty of. And hey, it's ready. And from 9, it starts at 9. Keep that in your mind, the time. It's like 9 in the morning. It was a warning to all who viewed it, setting an example. Whoa, I see that. I don't want to get in trouble with them. Woo, that is bad. There was no more terrible death than by crucifixion. Even the Romans themselves regarded it with a shudder of horror. Cicero, the Roman politician and orator, declared it was, and I quote, the most cruel and horrifying death. Not a happy lesson today. Not a happy lesson. But, yes.
And it's not something I did. I just read an article once. I'm going to ask you, when you were crucified, you died from lack of venous return. In other words, the blood just pools down in your body, and you don't, that's what you die from.
But you die from, actually, the blood just comes out.
Well, it just,
Yeah.
stays at the bottom part of your body.
Is that a merciful way for the,
No, it isn't merciful.
I mean, I don't mean merciful, I mean, would it speed it up,
What?
the death, if the blood was flowing out?
I don't know that.
I don't know either.
Personally, I don't think it would. I
Yeah.
mean, it was
Yeah.
designed to be
Yeah.
terrible, you know.
Just not a lot of fun. Well, it was
It was
terrible.
definitely cruel and unusual.
Yeah, very. A crucifixion was, as I said, never done in Rome. The only place it was allowed was in the provinces that Rome controlled. So it wasn't done in Rome. No. But, hey, we don't have a problem with it being done in the provinces. You know, they're different. Actually, our lesson today is the first of 3 that focus on the cross that Jesus endured. In fact, standing by the cross is where we are today. That's where we are, standing by the cross. Pontius Pilate was the Roman procurator. What is a procurator, Bill? What's a procurator? Do you know? Good. I'm not the only dumb person in this. No, you're not dumb. Anybody know what a procurator is? Anyway, he was the Roman procurator of Judea who issued the official order sentencing Jesus to death by crucifixion. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell of this, so it's not just something that John did.
Must
I
have
got
been the
a-
definition is a procurator, that gives lessons to other people and tells them what to do.
Some kind of ruler anyway.
Yeah, I think that would be a very nice, a ruler,
Yeah.
a ruler. I got a little curious about this guy named Pilate. They talked about it and then that was it, but I said, hey, Wallace, hey, you're not gonna be able to get this out of your head unless you find out. So I went to the book that I really love, I have a long, large book, and it's called the Dictionary of the Bible, and it tells you everything. Bill, I think you have that. We bought that Dictionary of the Bible. It's a wonderful one. So I looked up Pontius Pilate. Who is this guy? What does he do? Here's what it said. Emperor Tiberius in Rome appointed Pilate procurator of Judea. He was a Roman citizen from a wealthy family. He wasn't Jewish. He was a Roman citizen from a very wealthy family. As procurator, he had absolute authority over the non-Roman citizens of Judea. So a procurator was a person that had absolute authority over the non-Roman citizens of Judea. He was never popular with the Jews as he was insensitive to their religion, but would back down if persuaded. And he was wishy-washy. He was an unprincipled achiever who was willing to sacrifice what he knew was wrong to give in to the demands of a mob to keep his job. Sounds like a great guy, doesn't he? He's caring more about his job than about the person that's being tried. He was unprincipled. He was an unprincipled achiever who was willing to sacrifice what he knew was wrong to give in to the demands of a mob to keep his job. Early in the Friday of Passover, Pilate handed Jesus over to the Jewish authorities to be crucified. They, in turn, handed Jesus over to the 4 Roman soldiers who were charged with carrying out the execution. So, in this province, the person that really carried out the execution was Rome, through the 4 Roman soldiers, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. Let's go to the cross. It's 9 o'clock in the morning on the Friday of Passover. Jesus is nailed to the cross. Incredibly, Jesus prays there for those who are executing him. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Then Jesus speaks to his mother Mary and to John, the beloved disciple. Jesus said to Mary, "Behold your son," referring to John. Then he turned to John and said, "Behold your mother," referring to Mary. Luke tells us that Jesus also spoke to the two criminals on either side of him. What did he do with the two criminals? What happened to one of them too? He prayed, "Jesus, take me with you. Take me with you." And Jesus said, "I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise." God, I love it. The Gospel of Matthew and John tell us a lot about the time frame of Jesus' time on the cross. At noon on the Friday of Passover, the sky turned black until around 3 o'clock. Or at 9, he is nailed. He has to walk at 9 o'clock to the cross. By this time, it's around 3 p.m. The sky turned black until around 3 p.m. And during that darkness, the veil of the temple was turned in two. What does that mean? The veil of the temple.
Wasn't that the cloth between the Holy of Holies was rent and separated?
Absolutely, Nancy. In the temple before this, there was a veil. The only person that could go in there was the rabbi and nobody else. But at that time, as soon as that happened, the veil of the temple was turned into no more. That meant that you did not go to anyone except Jesus Christ for your Messiah. Only Jesus. The veil of the temple was rent. And shortly before 3 p.m., Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Class, what do you make of that remark?
Because he had to be separated from,
I'm sorry.
he had to be separated from God.
He did, and he did.
And that
He
was
felt
probably the most crucifying pain he had. was
exactly.
being
He,
separated from his
that is so true, and it showed he was half human. We forget sometimes. Jesus came to us half man, half God. If he had, we saw it in the scriptures, if he had aches and pains, just like you and me. If he walked near a bramble bush, what happened to him? He could get cut and he would bleed. He seems to be saying, God, why have you forsaken me? Get me out of this pain. I want to be back in heaven with you, dear Father. You're right. It's just, he had it. He had it. According to Roman tradition, the one crucified bore a placard announcing his crime. Pilate wrote an inscription and put it on the cross of Jesus. It was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Pilate's sign was written in 3 languages, Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. We get a clue from that, class. Why 3 languages?
Everyone could understand it.
Exactly, Janie. Well, if you wrote it in Hebrew, some people could, but some couldn't. That was a very metropolitan area right there. There were a lot of people there that weren't Jewish. Hebrew was the language of religion. Greek was the language of philosophy. And Latin was the language of law. So Pilate didn't realize it, but he did what he did not intend to do. Having it in 3 languages showed that Jesus stood for everything and everybody. I love that. Pilate didn't know what he was doing, but God was there, and he was directing him in his crazy mind to do the things that he needed to do. And he did it, just the things that he thought he shouldn't be doing were perfect. It was required also by Roman law that soldiers had to be at the crucifixion. A person was crucified not by other Jews or Gentiles, any of that. It was always by soldiers. And there were always 4 soldiers. It was their assignment. They had one thing to do. They had to carry out the punishment. All 4 gospel accounts talk about they then started gambling over what?
His clothes.
His clothes. That was a fulfillment. Sometimes, and Bill, I think sometimes we need to get into the Old Testament so we can really understand the New Testament. Psalms 22, the 18th chapter of Psalms said this: "They divide my clothes among themselves by a toss of the dice." And in a minute, they're going to toss dice. Here is an Old Testament, probably 700 years prior to that, saying, "They divide my clothes among themselves by a toss of a dice." 4 soldiers divided the clothing of Jesus into 4 parts. This included a headdress, a sash, sandals, an outer cloak, and an undergarment or tunic. Since a tunic could not be torn in 4 pieces, the 4 soldiers, what did they do? They gambled over it. The toss of the dice. That's what Psalm 22 was saying. They divided my clothes among themselves by a toss of a dice. 700 years prior to that. Since a tunic could not be torn in 4 pieces, the 4 soldiers gambled over it. The toss of a dice. Jesus did not die alone. John tells us the following people stood on the cross: his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and also Mary Magdalene. John, the disciple, stood with Mary. Jesus looked down in agony from the cross and said, "Woman, behold your son." And then he looked at John and he said, "Son, behold your mother." And from that day, John took Mary to his home to live out her life. John was the only 12 of the 12. John was the only one of the 12 who was not martyred. I am convinced that the reason Jesus saw to it that John lived out a long life was because John had taken care of his mother. He took her to his home, and there she stayed until she died. And John, if you really want to be surprised, the book of John was written around 100 AD. 100 AD. Jesus had already been dead for probably, he had been crucified for probably 60 to 70 years. And here's John remembering all of this, being blessed. He had gone to Patmos. He was in Patmos and he wrote Revelation there. That was around 90. And so then the emperor of Rome said, "That's an old guy that's really up in years. He's not causing me trouble over there in Patmos. I'm going to make him free." So he let him be released, and John went back to Ephesus. He loved the city of Ephesus, and when he was in Ephesus, he sat down and composed the book that you and I are looking at today. As I wrote this lesson and I pondered things in my life, I realized what you all may be thinking. The fear of the unknown grips each of us during our lifetime. There's not probably a person in here, I think I'd be safe to say, that there's sometimes the fear of the unknown will really grab you. The uncertain outcome of a set of circumstances or an event can bring us anxiety. Will this wedding day result in a happy marriage? Will we be able to have children? Will I remain healthy? And on and on. Our actions should follow the example of Jesus when we are faced with crisis. 1 Peter said on our banner, cast all your anxiety on Jesus because he cares for us. Cast all of your anxiety on Jesus because he cares for us. He loves us. And someday we're going to be going to heaven. And Jesus is going to be on the right hand of God his Father. And he's going to say, here's John Wallace Faulkner. He did some things he shouldn't have done. He didn't do things he should have done. But he's a Christian and he loves you. And Jesus is going to say, pass him in. And that's what's going to happen with you all too. You all are the salt of the earth. You're here in church today. You have anxieties, you have problems, but also you have opportunities. Jesus taking our anxieties upon himself is a first step to conquering our fear of the unknown. And that's a lesson for today. Is there anything anybody wants to comment on? These lessons are different. They're gory in some ways, but they're wonderful. They're wonderful because we know how it ends. We know how it ends. Any comments? Okay, let me close this in a prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for reminding us of your painful death on the cross for us. May this lesson be a reminder to all of us that someday we will see the marks on you from that day. Use the reminder from Peter that we are free to cast all of our anxieties on you, dear Jesus, because you care so wonderfully for us. We ask all of this of you, for we ask it in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.